My name is Jim Clark. I'm the councilman of the 5th Ward. This is the Glens Falls Police Department Reform Committee. This committee was put together by Mayor Hall, and I'm the chairman of the committee. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Only one person on the committee can speak at one time because of the microphone, so it can pick up that person. If there's too many people talking, it will not pick it up, and it will be hard for people to hear that are watching. This committee was started meeting back in October. We are working on a proposal for police reform that the governor has tasked all police departments throughout New York State with, and we are working diligently to do that. This is a working committee at this point in time, so we will not be taking any questions or comments via YouTube, but we are taking them on the city's police website page, glensfallspd.com, their contact page. There's an email tab there where you can type in your questions, comments, suggestions. Also on the City Police Department's website page, in the news section is all our presentations, our notes from the meeting, suggestions. So if people want to go look at that, we're more than happy to take comments, and if there's questions that can be answered, the police department will answer them for you. If there are comments or suggestions, they'll take them down and present them to the committee, and then we'll go from there. The goal is to provide a working plan, a living document by the end of the month, end of December, early January. So we have an opportunity to have several different forms for people to offer their input. What the document looks at that point in time compared to how it ends might look completely different based on suggestions. But this committee has worked hard to pinpoint some areas where we think the police department can grow and benefit from, and we'll be discussing that tonight. Those topic areas, we started that last time, and we'll be finishing that up and hopefully have something to look at the next time around, and that will be on the city's webpage. So with that being said, since this is new for everyone and everyone's here watching on YouTube, I'd like to start at this end of the room and work our way around to introduce the committee members.
I'm Diana Palmer, 3rd Ward Councilwoman for the City of Glens Falls.
Jason Carasone, Warren County District Attorney.
Bob Usey, Director, Warren County Probation.
Marcy Flores, Warren County Public Defender.
Lee Braggs, Glens Falls Branch NAACP, First Vice President.
Mary Good, Glens Falls Branch of NAACP President.
Joe Beauclair, Assistant Chief, soon-to-be Chief as of January 10th, the police, Glens Falls Police.
Linda Wright with Office of Community Services for Warren and Washington County, Children's Home Coordinator.
Hobbs Prado, founder of Lower Adirondack Visionary Associates.
Mike Seidel, Public Safety Commissioner.
Sergeant Jared Smith from the Glens Falls Police Department. Sergeant Miguel Chico, Glens Falls Police Department.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and dedication to this committee. I know some of you are doing double duty. I know the county met yesterday, and appreciate you guys meeting again tonight. This is a very important topic, and we'll continue to work through it. And this issue is not going to go away. We'll have this working document, the deliverables, to present to the governor's office, and we'll continue to meet in some form or fashion and make sure those deliverables are being achieved. So we're excited for that this process won't just end when we present the packet to the governor's office, but it will continue to evolve. So we're excited about that. So with that being said, I want to just pick up from our last meeting. we started going over topic areas. We talked about community engagement and transparency in the department, talked about education and training of officers, and recruiting and retention of officers. So we've got 2 topic areas left to discuss. That's called grievances and complaints. So we can talk about that area. We're looking at civilian oversight and review is one of the areas some committee members wrote down. So if anyone wants to say something.
Could I actually just say something before we start into that?
Absolutely.
Just a couple things that were discussed at the last meeting. One of the things was training, and Sergeant Chico talked about the principled policing. And one of the things Mr. Prado mentioned also was having the ability to see what some of these trainings consist of, see overviews and that sort of thing. So I brought a packet of the course overview and outline that he took when he took the training, and that we plan on going forward implementing at the police department. So I brought handouts. I will post these items to our website so that everybody can get access to them. But I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Great. Thank
Do you have enough down there?
Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to mention that because that was one of the training issues we discussed last time. One of the other issues that was brought up at the last meeting was data and information and that sort of thing. So that was one of the reasons we put all of this stuff out that we've discussed at our previous meetings. That's all been placed on our Glens Falls Police website, as well as that gets pushed out to our Glens Falls Police Facebook page for people to view. One of the other things that we had talked about putting out there is that every month we, as a police department, have to present a department report. Do our investigation, it turns out to be unfounded, or we make it's undetermined, whatever, that'll probably just stay at that level, and they won't necessarily be aware of that. But if it's something that results in discipline, counseling, because there's all kinds of different layers as far as what happens to an officer when we get a complaint, they're included in that process from the once the investigation is completed. They're presented with the facts of the circumstance. We discuss what they want to do. We make recommendations as far as based on what we think should happen, and then they either accept that, or they come back, or they say, we'd like you to do this, or we'd like you to do that. We basically take our direction in that regard from the Board of Public Safety.
So do the individuals that make the grievance know that it goes to that next level, or are they aware that they have that opportunity to request for it to go to that level as a non-biased evaluating?
I don't know that it's specifically described that way, because the findings of the complaint or the process is ultimately relayed to the person making the complaint. Whether we get into the meat and potatoes perhaps as deep as that, I guess it's case by case what questions are asked and kind of what the feedback is from the person that's actually filing the complaint. It's one of the fortunate things, I guess, of being a smaller police department. It's not as if you fill out this form in triplicate and then it goes to this desk and it goes to this desk. Basically, if you call and file a complaint, and it's a lower level complaint, that'll be something that'll be handled by a first line supervisor. The person making the complaint will be having phone contact, will be having dialogue back and forth with that officer and or that sergeant, or whoever that ultimately ends up being. And if it goes beyond that level, if it goes up the administrative chain, then me or the chief or whoever that's handling that will become the point of contact, and we'll be actually engaging and basically say this is what happened or this is what didn't happen, and then go from there.
So they might never know that it went to public.
Yeah, unless they ask or what have you. Yeah, and the reason that it's kind of a vague kind of thing is, to be honest with you, it's not something that we're dealing with every day. It's not like people are coming in every day with complaints. We may get, most of the issues that we find that we have are from internal review. Basically, you'll be a supervisor reviewing our use of force, and I think the chief mentioned that at one of the previous meetings, that all of our uses of force go through a couple of different layers of review to make sure they're in compliance with policy. As far as somebody calling and saying, so-and-so, I had a problem with them, I didn't like the way they talk, whatever, you know, we may get one or two of those a year. It's not like it's happening on a regular, repeated basis.
And the Board of Public Safety reports to who?
Council?
We report to the city council. Usually the mayor or Jim will be in the meeting, and they will then convey to the city council whether we recommend you get a stop sign here or no parking there. But when it comes down to a matter of police discipline, what'll happen is the department will recommend a course of action. And typically, these are not for the stuff we see on TV. These are from internal infractions, violations. And they'll recommend a course of discipline against the officer. And then the Public Safety Commission will then say, well, yes or no, or modify it. And it goes back to the chief, and he implements it because he manages his department.
Now, the form of discipline for these officers, does the burden of misconduct fall on the taxpayers, on us? So say that officer has to be suspended for a time being till the investigations are over, do the burden of the cost for a paid leave officer fall on us?
Well, there is, it's written into the rules that basically an officer can only be suspended for 30 days without pay. If the matter isn't resolved by the end of that 30-day window, they're actually entitled to go back on the books while the process works its way through the system.
And then there are grievance procedures. So if an officer is offered a disciplinary response to some sort of problem, he can grieve it. And then you get the union involved and the union's lawyer, and it's typical of public employee unions that you get this big thing going on, and back and forth. So you just don't know. There's no easy answer to what you ask.
This topic was one of my suggestions about, how people could make their complaints or bring their concerns. And I think it kind of ties into the discussion from last time we met about a community liaison. And so I think if we had that position, that person could be a source to take the complaint sometimes, but also of information. They can inform the person of the process. Here's what's going to happen, and then they can follow up and say, did you hear back, that kind of thing. So I think that's an important piece. I don't know how other people feel about that.
Who would take on that position? Who could be capable of? I love that idea, but who would we put in a place of trust to get that information between both parties, and who would take that responsibility on, though? It would be my question. Would it be public safety? Would it be, someone from the county, as far as a professional, a therapist, or some type of social caseworker between the police and
Well, I don't have the answer for sure, but I do think there's value in having a community liaison be part of the police department, because they can then do outreach connecting the police department to the community, which was one of the goals we discussed last week. They can attend meetings and go to, the senior center or a PTA meeting or a third ward meeting or whatever, and connect with the community and be known in the community and be kind of a trusted person for people to go to. So
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but I think we came to that conclusion at our last meeting, right? That we needed a community liaison.
Well, I'm bringing it up now because I think that could assist us in terms of helping someone understand when I make a complaint, what happens. They can explain the process.
Yeah, so that's a good point, though, to have included in our suggestions, is that, we do need a community liaison, and the community can see that there is a process, because a lot of the community don't know about that process. So if we included that process, I think that would be, very helpful for our,
I think if we definitely make that one of our points.
Right,
Uh,
that's fine.
And then down the line, we could, come up with an individual or a group or whoever to perform those duties.
Right.
And explaining the process is important because as the assistant
Right.
chief talked about, we talked about civil service law, things are in contract, so if there's, an issue that happens, people always wonder why is that individual suspended with pay and those kind of things. But it's a process that is civil service law, so if people know that, then it's just like, oh my God, why is this happening? It's a process that'll work its way through.
And a lot of people do not know that.
Correct, that's right. Chief, I did have a question. I know we're looking for solutions. Sometimes we don't know what the problem is. External complaints. How many complainants would you say you get a year? External, not things you find someone messed up their paperwork, something like that.
Like I said, it's probably one or two. The only one that I can think of this year we had was probably back in April or May, and I can't think of any other that we've had this year. I've been in my position for 2 years, so I would be aware of them. Maybe we had one last year also. It's not something that we get. I'm generally proud of our officers. They handle themselves professionally, and it's oftentimes they're encountering people not at their best, and so it's not unusual for people to be unhappy when they encounter the police. But by and large, our officers do what they're supposed to do. I think that reflects in that we're not getting a ton of complaints.
And the reason I raise that is because this liaison, they would have to do a whole lot of different things than
Yes.
this. This would be a very tiny piece of their role, hopefully. And I think something we should consider when we put this proposal together is put out some numbers like what expense is this going to cost? Because this is the governor's proposal that we do this, so we should be including costs to see if they're going to give us any monies, if the state's going to fund any of this.
I had to talk to the executive chamber, and they recommended the same thing. They said, put a budget cut on there on the table right now, but I wasn't gonna propose a budget cut with the committee without having to bring this up. This is direct, budget a number.
But no, if you want a liaison, what does that cost?
Right.
And then where does that come from?
Right.
I think one way with the grievance is, and the liaison, I think, the things that you're talking about with speaking to, and I think some of this, a lot of what I hear, I know is already happening. So maybe it's just making that awareness and having that website maybe being a little more robust would help. So if you have a grievance, here's where you go, here's the process. I don't know. But I feel like you already have a grievance, quite an involved process for grievances, and you don't have a lot of grievances. So when we're putting this forward, how do we want to put this forward? We all agree we want to have a process. There is a process in place. I don't know if it even needs any great change, but it sounds like everyone likes the idea of having it being more publicly aware, so increasing awareness of the process.
Yeah.
And I believe that even if we increase the awareness, we might actually get more, you can't react to the initial response of people being aware of it. You might get more complaints initially, but then you have to balance that out because I think that it's really about awareness and then follow through and then continuing that process. So it strengthens your process.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And I put one more thing because I forgot when I came in with it. Glens Falls is the only police agency in the county right now that has body cameras.
Right.
So these body cameras, I like them. They're a tremendous amount of work because all that data comes in and you have to watch it. So even a small case of 3 officers arrive, you've got now potentially hours of data. But that is something that goes both ways. So if there's a complaint, they may actually be able to review and see video footage of that. No, the state police doesn't have it. The sheriff's doesn't currently have it. It's very expensive, obviously. It's a real luxury that Glens Falls does have it right now.
I think the challenge, though, and I've heard with the body cams, is that not necessarily all the footage is good or clear, and so I think that's can't rely on that, but it's definitely a plus.
Well, what I would say is, body cams are fairly new in the criminal justice system. We live in a world where we have to rely on the credibility of people and judge credibility. Like we can't. Every witness I have isn't wearing a camera everywhere they go and everything they do. And the police aren't either. Let's be honest, the camera's only getting some portion of it. And sometimes it's at night, sometimes they're running, lots going on. So, you know, a lot of that comes down to credibility, and I feel like I don't want us to be a world where we only trust what we see recorded on a camera, and we can't trust the people that we are relying on to do these things.
And just to piggyback on that, I think that's why it's important for us. We hold ourselves to a high standard. We expect a lot of our officers for that specific reason, that if we get complaints, we're not afraid of complaints. If our officers aren't doing what they're supposed to do, that's an issue for us. Nobody likes a police officer that doesn't do what they're supposed to do than a police officer who does, because we all get judged the same. And so if we have our officers out there that are not conducting themselves in a professional manner, that are mistreating people, we're happy to know about it, and if it's true, we'll take appropriate action to make sure that it doesn't happen. And that goes into everything that they do as far as testimony, being able to interact with the community. It's just, we expect that of our officers. And
those cameras do achieve a goal, as we seen in Albany last week. And we've heard on film, on camera, with some bias from an officer. His conduct did not approve of any station, any chief approved of what he said. But without that camera, and being that I have a family member that is a retired police sergeant, and I don't know if everyone knew that, he does say that 90% comes in-house. That was an officer that told on another officer. That it was another officer that looks in those cameras and said something to one of his hierarchy officers and said, well, this is a problem. So we can trust those cameras and trust the good officers as well to basically, we know that if there's some bias going on, that we can trust other officers looking on those cameras saying, well, hey, I seen there's a problem here. Here you go, chief, let's address it. So.
I should say that Chico, if I can get to, just so everyone's aware, all that information that they're reporting is sent to the district attorney's office. I'll be honest, we can't review all of the footage. We don't have enough manpower to do it. But all that we receive is sent to the defense attorneys, including the public defenders, assigned counsel, private attorneys. There are a lot of eyes on this material. We've had situations, nothing like what you're describing, but we've had situations where we had a concern, we would reach out to the chief or the assistant chief, we'd say, hey, take a look at this. I'm not sure this, how you want to handle it, and then they would look at the situation. So there's a lot of eyes on that data. Nobody else in the county has it. Glens Falls is the only one. It's a pretty good thing that we have that tool available to us.
Though we need public oversight, is there a way to have that liaison looking at those? Those people that are looking at those film and videos are just the DA and the police officers? Is there any? No.
No, defense attorneys.
Defense attorneys. Okay, so there is a lot of eyes.
There's a lot of eyes on it. And to be honest with you, if you wanted to hire someone and all they did was watch that, you'd have to hire a team of people who were 24/7 because the cameras are rolling 24/7 on all of these officers. It's a massive amount of information.
Sorry, Mr. Chico.
I'm over here at the corner.
Sorry about that.
I just want to make a couple points. The first is the supervisor, and Sir Sergeant Smith can attest to this. We can also be held liable for what our officers do. We can be disciplined as well. So it's extremely important that obviously we do our job as supervisors. If a complaint comes through, that we thoroughly investigate this. Because if it's found, obviously, that we didn't do our job, we also can be held accountable. The second point that I'd like to make is, and I mean, you can pipe in on this as well, most of the quote-unquote calls we get from citizens, I'm a midnight sergeant, so for example, this week I got a complaint about a parking ticket. Someone was wondering why they got a parking ticket. Those are kind of like the complaints, and if you simply explain between the city of Glens Falls, you can't park your vehicle on the street between the hours of 2 and 6 o'clock. If for some reason you have to, you can call a phone number. And oftentimes, the complaint is just ended right there. It's more of like, people aren't seeking to get the officer in trouble, people aren't seeking any type of that. They just kind of want to speak to someone to understand why. Which I think, if you put that all on a community liaison officer, specifically on one person, I think that might be tough for that person to be able to do that and their regular existence and everything else. Because I don't think, unless we get some type of funding, I don't think there's a person that can be, we're small. I don't think there's a person that can be dedicated to wear every single hat that we're actually requesting from that person. Because they're still gonna have a job to do outside of that. I mean, that's obviously a decision to be made by the Public Safety Board and the chief, but I'm just thinking logistically that's a lot on that one person to, you know, someone called about a parking ticket, that person has to do.
And I guess my thought, and then, 'cause I also had this on my list as far as grievances, and not necessarily those that are criminal intent, but those incidents that happen that when we think about the mental health and the population and individuals, and not necessarily those individuals would go to the DA or to the defender's office, but a family member might make a grievance, or that individual might have a grievance about the situation, and then how that process then gets that, so that transparency, and then, like you said, having it on the website, people knowing what the steps are, knowing that there are next legs and other, to go to public safety, or those are the incidents where I'm thinking that, you know, because all the eyes won't necessarily be on the body cams for those situations, and so really looking at how do we do that uniformly across the board so that, you know, everybody get, not just,
I was just,
just a fair shake at looking at, having their voices heard if they're feeling that there have been situations where there's been challenges.
I'm sorry, I spoke with Chief Bosco about, because we know that they don't have a YouTube channel right at the moment, which isn't a big issue. But with going virtual and with the internet, if we set up their YouTube page, we can provide that on their YouTube channel on a constant basis. There's to be different videos with different information, and I'm hoping that we can get a sign language interpreter and someone for our hearing, you know, for our hearing impaired. Because how about our people with disability that can't communicate the way we can, and how would they find information out? And if they're watching videos and they lose their hearing aid and they can't, can we provide closed caption on the videos that we put? YouTube is easy. It takes a camera, a backdrop, and preparedness for information to pitch out that we have. We can always provide updated information with YouTube, and also have a sign language interpreter discussing everything that we already had to provide that to our people with hearing impaired.
So that's for transparency, right?
Transparency, yes.
Well, I was just going to kind of piggyback off of what Sergeant Chico was talking about. I work during the day, so I work 12 p.m. to 10 p.m. Most days. And our sergeant's phone rings off the hook daily. Wouldn't even be able to give you a number, but I field phone calls all day about the process of how to do something. Questions like, Sergeant Chico was talking about. Why did this happen? What can I, if I have a complaint, what can I do to file that complaint? That's just a constant daily thing that I go through, and that's just my experience. Specifically, I just had, while I was sitting here, a citizen of the city called to figure out how to log on to YouTube to watch this. So those are the phone calls that I'm receiving. And it's across the board as to the topics of what they want to talk about. But I spend a lot of time on the phone, just answering questions. So a lot of that is, people do have questions, and I answer them to the best of my ability, but people are asking questions all the time.
Sergeant, do you think if we, like Jason said, a more robust website, do you think that would alleviate some of those calls, or is it more, are those type of questions more spur of the moment type? I'm not going to get on my laptop or my phone or whatever to look it up.
Yeah, typically people have questions, and a lot of it is how to file a criminal complaint against somebody. They'll call to figure out they have a vehicle parked on their property, just for example, and they don't know what to do with it. And those questions are across the board, so I think that list would be endless, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But I'm referring to the grievance process.
Would that information, what we're talking about to show transparency, would it only have to be at this Glens City website? Or can it also be on if we give that information, like he said, he could come up and give instructions on how to go about taking that grievance to one of the officers. But if we could, it'll probably be what, 8-minute video tops that someone can just shoot, and that covers everybody's questions. Instead of calling, they can just go to the YouTube page and have its title, how to make a complaint with a grievance, what do you do about a ticket, and have those different things where they could just pop it up and the questions are answered right there.
I do throw this out there. The DA's office has a website. It's nothing fancy, but we do have certain instructions on there. And with that said, we get calls constantly on the things that are on there. And we talk to them. We say, well, it's on the website. They say, well, I can't find the link. It's one of those things. There is not a perfect way, but what we have is in this group, such a small city. When I used to cover city court for years and years, people would just walk in the door. Mary used to see people, they'd just walk in the door and they'd say, hey, how do I deal with this? So there was a lot of that, which I think that personal contact is a huge value that the city offers. It's right in the heart of downtown, it's easy to access, but having the internet and having some of those web exposures isn't bad. So for example, some calls you can say, here's what you do, and you can always check the website if you forget what I tell you, and you might get some directions. You're not going to have everything, but the grievance process, you could have an explanation if that made sense.
And we might be able to do it on multiple medias, not just the YouTube or your website, but if we did public forum and informational kind of things that sometimes, or speak at the PTA meeting, that expand these forums that we do, because some people don't have access to the computer. When you think of the homeless population, they have to wait for the library to open, and during COVID, there's lots of other obstacles that are in place. So
That's what,
if we broaden that,
COVID, everything's gonna be on the internet for the next 60 days. We would think, hopefully, that's what it's looking like. We're doing all our virtual workshops virtually. So, I don't mind spending time. I have video production equipment. I have the lights. It wouldn't cost nothing for me to come in and shoot video to put up on a YouTube page to throw out information. And it's just finding the right people to throw that information out there and do a right production. And I think we get the message out.
We'll put everything down on our proposal and, talk about the different levels or different ways of communicating the information, the process and stuff like that. YouTube could be one of them. Other avenues like meetings, community liaison officer, things like that. And I agree with Jason that there's going to be a price tag with some of these things. And I'm hoping that, when everyone submits their information, the governor takes that seriously. And, obviously we're in a very financially difficult time, but, I don't think this is going to, this is a process that will have to continue to evolve. And if we set these as goals, hopefully, pray to God, we get through this and, the economy starts to come back and we can start to see these things come to fruition. That might cost some money. In the meantime, maybe we can come up with some creative ways where we can try to address some of these things, like we were talking with a school resource officer and things like that. There is dollars and cents tied to some of this stuff, and it's going to be very important.
Diana's been trying to, I keep talking, so she's been trying to get in here. So.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't suggesting that a liaison officer would handle every call and every communication from the public, as much as we see value in that in terms of outreach, which we talked about last week. And I was saying in that being the main capacity, they could also be a source of education and information with their connections in the community. And I know we talked about not necessarily hiring a person for that, but using people we already have, like the school resource officer who doesn't have something to do all the time because school is not in session all the time. And I also want to mention that there was a report from the United States Conference of Mayors in August on police reform and racial justice, and that was one of their suggestions is, community liaisons. So.
I just want to, I think, if nothing else that we've learned through this process, or that I've learned through this process, is that a lot of people just don't know what we do and how we do it. And it's very easy to get wrapped up. I've been living this for 20 years, so I know the ins and outs, but most people don't interact with the police. And so when they actually need to interact with the police, they don't know what they need to do. Or what their options are, or how they can do things. So I think clearly one of the things that needs to be the focus, my focus going forward, is to make it a point of meeting with the civic groups and the religious groups and the community groups and just explaining to them, and this is who you call if you have a question, this is what we do, if you have issues in regards to this, and just that needs to be a priority. We need to make sure that myself as an administrator and that my officers are aware that it's not just about driving around and writing tickets and doing that kind of stuff, but it's actually going out to the community and letting them know what services we provide and what we can offer them. So that's free. We're already out there doing stuff anyway, so you're already paying us. So those are things that we can do that don't cost anything extra. So,
Mr. Clark, sir?
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Chief. We know what's at stake here, right? And does everybody know what the reduction of the funding that the governors, does anyone know what's the reduction for the state funding that they're putting up on stake for the planning? I think they said it's 20%, right? 20%, around $3.5 million. Now, if they threatening to withhold that, and we're forming a police committee and we're coming up with a plan, why can't we let him know that we need some of those funds that you're trying to withhold from us by coming up with a plan to instill in this plan? Is there a way to propose that funding that they're saying they can withhold without a comprehensive plan here?
Well,
So there's $3.5 million. We know we need finances to come up with this plan. Why can't we get put that up for them and say, well, listen, this plan is going to take a lot of money. You're holding $3.5 million over our head. Why don't you come up with some finances for us?
That's already real money that goes out into the community, to the police departments. He's saying that if you don't present this plan, well, the potential to withhold that funding is there. I mean, the city police department is funded right now. We've got a budget. We approved a budget for next year. We're moving forward, and we'll present a plan to the governor. But as part of that plan is some cost estimates of what some of these things might look like. Additional personnel, and it's not only just costs, but I think too, there was some mention yesterday with the sheriff. Civil service is a big issue as well. And I think, that needs to be looked at by the legislature and the governor as well. How can we maybe massage that to help, communities like ours with addressing and making a broader base of people to pull from, of color, of different ethnic backgrounds, things like that. And so it's dollars and cents, but I also think there's some other legislative things that we need to put out there as well. So that's just my 2 cents. We need. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I know we came up 1 to 5 as far as our priority list. Maybe we could add number 6 on there being a funding and kind of lumping funding into all of them. Just because, you think about body cams, eventually those will fade or break. And so, those
we
are
talked
things
about
that,
dashboard cameras and things like that. So that was,
it would be kind of funding as a
So.
big category?
Yeah, so what I was gonna do is, I wanted to do like a preface of our proposal, talk about, what the what was asked of us, what the police department already does, talk about our discussions and say there's doubt, and then come to a conclusion after we put our proposals together and say, all right, well, here's our proposals, and our conclusion is we're gonna need some financial help from the state to achieve some of these things. So I sort of have it in my mind that like, all right, we've got, a starting point, all our different proposals, and then, yeah, hey, we're gonna need some help. Type sort of deal. So that's how I look at trying to pull this together to give to you guys, and then we can massage it however you guys want, however the public wants. If there's something they think can fall under a category and we missed it or in our discussions, we can add that, stuff like that. So, but that's how I was sort of looking at how that should go, because there is no guidelines of how to present something, a reform proposal to the governor's office. It just says, here's a copy of the resolution the governing board has to pass, but there's no formula of how he wants to see it. So it's going to be, I'm assuming it'll be all across the board, these different presentations, how they look. I just want ours to look professional. So.
I gotta say that this committee, some of us are working double, some of us are working triple and quads over here. And this committee has been ahead of the ball compared to everywhere else I've been knocking on doors and trying to get reform done. This committee has been amazing. We listen to each other. I have hope for our city. I have hope for this committee and everything that we're doing for our community. I'm so ecstatic about this committee doing it the right way, and compared to what we see around the other counties and around the state, where people have admitted they're behind the ball. I just wish that other people could just see our committee, take it as a model, and then let it go from there,
Well,
so
we are very blessed and fortunate to have some wonderful community leaders around this table, and then people that step up in the community on a daily basis. This community generosity knows no limits, and I'm just thankful for that. So.
And Jim, just to sum up funding, of all the thousands of police departments and sheriff's departments in the state, we're not the only one that are going to have issues with funding. So, hopefully that's a message that reform is certainly needed, but on the other hand, it's not cheap. So there are things we can do, but in the long range, and this is hopefully something that evolves, that these are things when the economy picks up that, funding is made available to accomplish these things. And
Yeah,
save money in the long run.
Absolutely. All right, so we're moving on to our mental health. That was a big topic of discussion, a need a needed area in here, and so we talked a lot about our LEAD program there, and if you guys want to just review a little bit about that for our folks on YouTube, that would be great, because that's moving forward regardless. That's going in our proposal, but that's moving forward. We're moving forward with it. So I don't know if you want to start, or if you.
I'll let you start,
Diana.
Well, LEAD is a diversion program. So the idea is if there is somebody who the police think qualify for this program, they are given a choice. Do you want to go into the legal system, or do you want to participate in the LEAD program?
So LEAD means what? L-E-A-D?
Law Enforcement Assistance Diversion.
Okay.
Yeah. And if they choose to participate, they are linked to a case manager who will link them to services that may help them get back on track. So mental health services, housing services, substance abuse services, all of those kind of things. And they work with a case manager who helps them meet their goals over time. And I don't know if anyone else wants to say more, but this is not for violent offenders. This is for people who would qualify for this kind of program, because it's really more of a mental health or a substance or a homelessness issue than a criminal issue.
It's actually a supportive role in helping to build the individual so that they can be successful in the community, and also know have the resources met to wrap around the individual. So it's not punitive.
Is there a way we can find a plan like a LEADS program for juveniles? Because I know that's just for adults, but we don't have a plan for 18 and under. As far like a LEADS program for juveniles. Because I believe LEADS are only for adults. Is that correct?
It is 18 and up, right?
If we could formulate a plan to sort of like a LEADS program just for juveniles, if we could come up with a plan and that kind of like sisters that LEADS program, would that be a possibility for juveniles and our young people in our community?
Don't you have a system like that for juvenile delinquents and juvenile offenders where they're not criminally held accountable potentially if they meet certain criteria?
Right, we have, similarly, we have a diversion program where JD complaints come into our department, and what we look to do is divert them out of the system, not bring them into family court. And with that, we attempt to link them up to the services they need, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, counseling, or whatever. So in a sense, we do a little bit of that type of work, but I think certainly anything you can expand upon to meet people on the streets of where they're at would certainly be of assistance. So I think proposing something for juveniles along the lines of LEADS is not unreasonable. I think it's a good idea, but to come into our department, usually you're referred either by a PINS or a JD, so someone's bringing you to the attention to our department. But I'm sure there's many youth out there that do not come to the attention of our department. So having something extra certainly, I think, is valuable.
And the other flip side, if they don't come in through the door of the juvenile justice mode, they actually do have what we call health home, which is kind of a wraparound case management supportive program, where if there's a youth that was struggling with their mental health challenges and substance issues, could come through that door and then be linked up to a case manager. And we do have an array of services that are wrapped around that individual that they can actually almost do a la carte, in a sense of skill building, kind of respite, in-home therapy. So there is another array of that, and then so not only just case management, but those other supports. So we do have two doors, and that goes from that 0 to 21-year-old age in that sense. So we do have those resources. It's probably about making you aware and how do we link that information so that the police are aware of that, and I think that would tie into that social worker resource role. If we got a person to do that, then they would be aware that they could link to that and to SPOA and to health home or go through the PENS route if that individual needed that direction as well.
I had a thought, because and Diana may have raised it in a prior meeting, and it sounded, so there's a lead, law enforcement assisted diversion, and that sounds nice, lead, but maybe it should just be law enforcement assisted, maybe, because there's so many encounters that there's no diversion, there wouldn't be an arrest, there wouldn't be that level of intervention, but there still might be that need to make that connection. And because we're small, that's an advantage, the size of the city. And so it might encompass when you had a young person, no, they wouldn't get arrested, maybe they're not going to end up going to probation, but maybe they could at least make the connection. And same with, and I think we talked about it in our last meeting, I'm willing to bet every police officer in this room knows someone or has been involved in reviving someone who's overdosed. Those people are not getting arrested, and they clearly need help. I'm sure they have family members that are desperate for them to get help. If there was a way to make those connections, those aren't diversions. There's not an arrest that's going to occur. But I think that we could make our own program that kind of covered the whole gamut. And so if we're, again, as we said, these things cost money. to make these connections. We want to use the services that we have already and try to help the police, when they're having those encounters, get those connections made.
And we do have some of that. We have mobile crisis that's in our area that does look at not only mental health, but substance use and developmental disabilities. So kids that are struggling in that area from 0 to 21, they have a resource, plus we have an adult mobile crisis. So it's a matter about really making and educating our community to access those and to know all the resources, because I think that we a lot of time have resources in our communities that aren't tapped because people aren't aware of them in different forms and different situations.
So, I'm sorry, go.
I was just going to say, we're even, this is a work in progress just in-house. This was something that we have recognized as a police department that this is an issue. I think the chief brought it up at a previous meeting, that this is not an appropriate use of arresting our way out of some of these issues. And just to piggyback a little bit what you said, there's a newer component to LEAD. It's a social referral. It's the type of person that's not necessarily committing crimes, but they're homeless or and they're just being encountered in non-criminal. They can also be referred. So that is already part of the program. But kind of going back to the mental health stuff, I've been involved with working with the community mental health folks, and we've been having monthly meetings, and as we're meeting and going over these names, and we just had one yesterday, and some of the names were like, oh, we need to bring so-and-so, so-and-so should be to the table. And one of those names was yours. You were suggesting bring you, because we had dealt with 3 juveniles in the last month that were brought to the unit for just things, and Carrie Wright was going to discuss with you whether you're familiar with any of the names, so I was going to talk to you about it after the meeting. But we're talking about bringing additional people to the table, because we're realizing initially it was just us, Rob York, and the Glens Falls Behavioral Health Unit. And as we've kind of dug deeper into this and we are going over some of the same names, we're like, well, so-and-so needs to be at this table as well, and so-and-so needs to be at this table as well. So some of this stuff is work that we've recognized, and we're trying to get there. It's like this committee, it's a work in progress. We're always trying to provide better services. So
here's a question for the DA, sir. Are you aware of Article 216?
What's that?
It's a legislation being pushed by Mr. Davis that kind of puts an edge on the LEAD program. So we have, it's like sometimes like some of us are, like that LEAD program will be a great idea, but now there's some politicians that are fighting to put with legislation to put like stops on like leads. So it's like we're doing some work here, but there are some legislation being written, and I believe it's called Article 216, to basically put like a stamp on like a LEADS program. Everyone can read about it, and it's coming from our district senator. So, I mean, like, how can we, if there's legislation being thrown out there, how can we be guaranteed that we can be successful in these type of programs if we know politicians are trying to cut programs like LEADS?
Right, and I mean, I think one of the things is that we want to make sure that we talk about, when we talk about LEADS, it's for those non-violent, criminal offenses of individuals that are struggling with mental health. And so pickup orders still would stand, and some of the statutes, the mental hygiene law would still stand. And I think that some of the concern is that we say, okay, we're going to do away with pickup orders, and we're going to do away with, needing police that individuals are at risk of being hurtful of themselves or others. And we have to know that that's when we do need law enforcement there, and that we're not negating or saying that that's not going to be valuable, or law enforcement is not valuable for. And we will use LEAD or the social worker at every situation. It would need to be a case-by-case situation. And I think that one of, Rob had talked about Broome County and the 911 and doing like that triage piece where they have an option to, if this is a non-violent, risk situation, however, an individual struggling that needs police, do they need police enforcement to kind of move to the next level? Or can the social worker or mobile crisis go out, that it's a safe environment for that individual to be exposed in? But where there are instances of danger to self or others, then we would need law enforcement, because there might be a weapon involved. There might be some risk of safety that we would have to look to.
So how do we work, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about LEAD. About 5 years ago, there was a SIMS grouping, which is Systems Intercept Mapping, which involved Warren, Washington County, Glens Falls Police Department was there, DA's office, probation, tons of agencies, to try to figure out where the disconnect was between law enforcement, mental health, and substance abuse. The spin also of that has been going on for 2 years, which is a law enforcement, I call it law enforcement lunch. It's the first Thursday of every month at noon, and it's run by mental health. Warren Washington Association of Mental Health is the overseeing agency, and the DA's office, probation, Glens Falls Police Department has been very active in all of this. And then from there was a specific program called LEAD. So LEAD is a specific program that is a model that we were talking about using, and that's what LEAD means. And I know when Jason, you're saying, maybe not LEAD, maybe we can change it. Of course we can change anything we want, but when we talk about LEAD, it's a model that we are basing things on. And I don't know if everybody knew that, so that's just what I wanted to bring up.
Right. It's a concept that some agencies are using, but I think you have to customize it to your community, your needs, and what you can do. Something I want to raise here, I think everyone's aware, police are using, I think of LEADs as a form of police discretion to a degree. And I think of it as like enhanced police discretion. They're getting assistance in the process. Police are using discretion every day. They don't just arrest everyone. There are cases they must arrest, domestic violence cases. There's some very obvious things. I think there's a lot of low-level problems that occur. Law enforcement may be familiar with those individuals. They may redirect them. It's not something that's criminal that needs an arrest. This would give them a tool to help them. So when they're doing the redirection, they're maybe making a connection that eventually hopefully takes hold and helps that individual not be involved in what we'll call police contact versus criminal contact. So they're still going to be arresting, obviously, and if this means anything, once those individuals that are arrested, there's diversion going on in Glens Falls right now. We have the opioid diversion, we have drug treatment court. There's ways that DAs are able to offer what's called an adjournment and contemplation of dismissal with treatment, with mental health. All kinds of avenues exist post-arrest. This just gives you a few more tools pre-arrest. Tools that I think already exist. I think I've seen it. Law enforcement's contacting with people. They're trying to resolve these low-level problems without, with minimizing their encounters. And I think this would just maybe help them get those people hopefully redirected and out of the contact with police. That's how I see it in my mind.
Just keeping aware that we do have pockets of poverty, and those pockets of poverty is where the drugs and the homelessness and the crime are coming out. So if we don't, we focus on where the poverty points are, and then we can address them into those parts of our hot spots of poverty and where we see our drugs and homelessness coming out of. Do we think that we have rural poverty in Glens Falls? Is there a perception? Do we think that we are a rich county? Because I know in Washington County that they deal with rural poverty all the time. How about for our city? Do we see any poverty? Do we, other than the homelessness? We know we got the homelessness that come off the bus. They're like kind of sort of implants because they come from different places and come off the bus. I've seen different ones. People with mental health and homelessness come through our town, getting off the Greyhound. But where do we see our pockets of poverty in this city, really, if any? And do we see crime coming out of those parts of the wards of community, like the chicken coops or things like that? Do we need to get more information, police information into those neighborhoods, in those communities?
Well, the chicken coops are long gone, and we have the Village Greens now. And it's a beautiful.
I'm sorry.
I'm
going back in the days there. Sorry.
I'm pretty sure there's poverty in the city of Glens Falls, but I don't think there's any pockets. I don't think there's any pockets that you can just identify and say this is the neighborhood where the poverty is.
Okay.
But there's poverty everywhere.
True.
Poverty exists throughout Warren, Washington County. Has been and it will continue.
Yeah, I mean,
And
go ahead.
And I just wanted to add to that. And speaking of the mental health issue, like Chief had said before, our police are unique because our police take each mental health case individually, like all agencies do, I'm sure. But like, say for instance, the sheriffs. Now, when they get a call, they go on the call. They arrest. That's what they do. But our police department, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's individual. They don't always arrest. They direct a mental health situation, not always for an arrest. They will direct it to another agency or whatever, MHU, or whatever they need to do. Now, all agencies don't do that. Let's not, mix words. They don't. But we do, and I think that is something to be commended, Right, Chief?
Yeah, if we get a call, it's not unusual for us to get welfare check calls and that sort of thing, and our officers will go out and we'll conduct an interview, and if they're fine, and based on their training experience, if there's no need for whatever, then they'll leave. If they need to refer them, we do have the ability, like Linda said, to refer to mobile crisis. If the person's presenting as a danger to themselves or others, we'll voluntarily transport them, or, if it's necessary that the officer determines they're a danger and they don't want to go, they can make them go and bring them to the unit for an evaluation. So it runs the gambit, it really does.
And see, that's my concern. We need to bridge that gap where there are, I don't want to call it arrests, but there are mental health issues on a call. And then the officer, he gets there and has no mental health experience. What's he supposed to do?
Yeah,
I would like to bridge that gap with mental health, Glens Falls MHU, or Warren County, or however it works. Somehow work with Glens Falls PD to bridge that gap.
Yeah,
Is that something that's feasible that we?
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about it. Certainly, we brought it up, I think, the last meeting in regards to the training. Certainly, it's like everything else. We have a very young department, and we have our senior guys. And unfortunately, the senior guy, a 30-year guy, is going to go and handle a call completely different than a person who's fresh out of the academy. That person just doesn't necessarily have all of the tools. They're going to fall back on their training and their experience, which unfortunately, so they might not have as many tools to deal with it. And that's where we as an administration have to make sure that we provide them with the tools. We have to provide them with the training. We talked about CIT training. We've talked about other things. If we're able to bring a social worker on board, we can actually do a lot of that training in-house. So certainly we as an agency, we have a responsibility to give our officers everything that they need when they go on a call and they're dealing with these situations to be able to handle it, because the last thing that we want to do is somebody who's in crisis is to make it worse. That's not what we want to do. Our goal is to get them the help that they need, and we need to make sure that our officers have the tools that they need.
Do community families, when they call you and they have, let's say a new family comes in the community and they have an autistic son or autistic daughter, autistic adult son, that sometimes has outbursts. Now, do the community, are these families communicating with you folks in a sense saying, well, listen, we do have outbursts with our autistic family member. Now, if you come here and he's acting outright, do you have a heads up before you come into the situation? Do families that have handicaps like that in their homes make it a thing to call the police and say, listen, I have a hard time with my child, and sometimes I have to call the police, but please, if you show up to my house and I'm having a situation, not that it's a violent, because some kids, yes sir.
Sure, we have a multiple array of autistic, obviously there's the spectrum, but our Warren County dispatchers, are trained to ask those certain questions. So not every instance that we're going into, we know that there's a possible, autistic, child in the house, but overwhelming majority of them, we know what we're going to when we get there. absolutely. And we get there, the parents call because the child is violent, out of control, and the parents have tried everything that they could do to de-escalate the situation. So we get there and we do what we can to de-escalate the situation, and majority of the time we walk out of there, the parents are happy, the child is de-escalated, they've done, they go to their room and play their video games, they're calm, the family's back to normal. That happens daily.
And then, we talked about this a couple meetings ago, but the idea of potentially bringing on a social worker would have two purposes. One would be to oversee the LEAD program, which is a specific program, but the other would be to kind of act as a secondary responder, right? So if the police go out and it's not a dangerous situation, it's more of a mental health situation, this person could then go out and engage with those people and help them find resources. They could do training for the police department. And the idea is that we could use that social worker to supervise interns so that we could have the case managers we need for LEAD. So I think what you're talking about with not just having them go into the diversion program, but also just helping people get resources is what we're looking to do with that program. Yeah.
So I just want to circle back a little bit because we mentioned 911 a couple of times. And in the police reform package, there's a section in there about 911. And I don't know how, whether you're getting your phone calls from our main phone number or are you getting your calls from 911? How does that work? And is there potential for 911 to be more of a vital role? They play a vital role to ferret out where certain things go.
The overwhelming majority come through county dispatch. We very rarely get stuff directly to our main line through us, but it happens where they get the sergeant's line. Generally, we have an automated system, so more often than not, the only time you get a live body through us is if you call the administration or if you call the sergeant's phone and they happen to be at the desk to answer that. But we have talked about that at the county meetings that I've been having with Rob York, and I think it was one of the issues that was brought up through the Broome County program is having the dispatchers trained in a certain way to handle calls a different way and to have to know what's a police response perhaps versus a different type of response and a referral and that sort of thing. So I know that was something you intended on reaching out to the sheriff to communicate with him to see how they can address that.
I watched a little bit yesterday of the meeting. I didn't catch I thought he mentioned something about 911 call center, but I'm not 100% certain if he did say anything about that or.
So the calls are directed through the county, so it wouldn't really be something that would be a part of this city plan, as I understand the way 911 calls are routed. But they did mention that's something at the county level that they may be looking at. But I think they're in the very preliminary stages of just figuring out what their plan's going to look like.
Okay.
And it's definitely something that has been expanding over time, and as far as different counties, and then Essex County or Northern County is looking at doing that same thing, and looking at that as being a dispatcher and having certain qualifying questions that would determine which way the call would actually go. Would it go to the police? Would it go to our mobile crisis? And how that would how the responders would be, those first responders would be, and where that would go. So.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything on this topic? It's almost 7:30, so I just we need to decide when our next meeting is. And again, I appreciate everyone's willingness. I know everybody's busy. They've got a lot going on, and personally and professionally, so I appreciate it. The holidays are around the corner, and I hope everyone has a nice Thanksgiving, but we're into December now and looking for a date for our next meeting. All right, Thursday's good. Do we want to go back to Thursday? Are Thursdays good?
I like Thursday.
They're not.
Thursday.
No, they're not.
Thursdays are not good.
I'm not ours.
Is any day good?
Not the
Except the
first,
first
first Thursday.
But other
No,
than that,
Thursdays are not
we
good.
can do Thursdays.
What about our Wednesdays?
No.
All right, no Wednesdays.
Thursdays is
Tuesdays, Tuesdays
Just
are
not
better.
the third, maybe just one, two.
Tuesdays.
Tuesdays are bad days for us because we have city council meetings and committee meetings on Tuesdays.
Yeah,
We're back to Monday.
back to
Oh,
Mondays.
God, no.
No.
Mondays are good too.
I can't stay on Monday.
Well,
I'm
Thursday.
retired.
Thursdays are tough for Linda.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you can't do that.
So,
Okay.
what
I
about
can
this?
be flexible. I can
the
do it
seventh?
Monday.
Monday.
I
It's
can
the
do it
7th?
Monday.
Monday the 7th?
I
I
can,
can do the 7th.
just kidding.
Is that all right?
Monday.
Single
12/7.
kids, I just got a dog, I got all the time in the
I'll
world.
give up
Can
on
we get 2 dates down, Monday the 7th and maybe the 21st, or people got plans for that holiday week?
You really push it.
Well, we can
Or
get
we
it.
can
can
push
get
it back
in.
to the
We can get it
28th,
in. No.
28th?
No.
No?
The
21st.
7th and the
7th and the
17th.
21st.
We could do the 7th and the 7th. Well, you can't do Thursdays.
That's the week.
I'll, that far in advance, I can switch it probably.
7th and the 17th? Yeah, I mean, that's a holiday week. I'm sure people are,
Yeah,
Y'all
'cause-
just, y'all messing with me.
kids, I think kids are out of school
Well,
that
that's
week.
better. Yeah, the week after that.
All right, so the 7th and the 17th, I'll send out the notes to everybody.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock here.
Here?
Yeah. All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.